everyone. After sharing my revelation, I've had some additional thoughts that I thought would be helpful in understanding the completed revelation. Um, but before you watch this video, I highly suggest that you watch the first video I posted, which covers all aspects of my revelation in detail. Um, but the first thing I'm going to be covering in this video is talking about the issue of duality and the pattern of the Trinity. So in the first video I made, I talked about how the pattern of the Trinity goes beyond the pattern of duality. So if you think about the pattern, we'll start with the pattern of duality because most people understand that, right? You have something above and something below. So in the case of the Bible, you have like heaven and earth, right? Or the seas in the sky. You have something above, something below, or like the land in the sky. Um, and that pattern exists all throughout this world too, like good and evil, right? You have all these different things that oppose each other. And that's something that God selected to be prevalent throughout his creation, but it's not something that goes beyond creation itself, if that makes sense. So the pattern that does go beyond creation is the pattern of the Trinity. Now, as a reminder, the pattern of the Trinity is you have the Holy Spirit hovering above Jesus. And in my video, I made the claim that Jesus is the intelligible realm. And to fully understand what that means, I suggest again you watch the first video. But as a brief summary, Jesus being the intelligible realm means he contains all possible ideas. So, anything that you can think of basically exists in the body of Jesus. Now, what the Holy Spirit does, which I cover in the video again, is he selects from the body of Jesus all of the ideas that glorify God the most. So in the beginning, before God created earth and the heavens, the Holy Spirit was hovering above the intelligible realm, or Jesus Christ, and it was selecting ideas that glorified God the most. And then God the Father, which is the third person, or not the third, right? He's the first person of the Trinity, but in this pattern of the Trinity, or this way of understanding it, he's like the final actor, right? He finally gives form to all of these things that the Holy Spirit selected. But as I was saying, right, the Holy Spirit selects all of those ideas that glorify God the most, and then God the Father gives them all physical form. Okay, so that's a brief rundown of what the pattern of the Trinity is. Now, I recently thought about, or I ran into an issue when I was analyzing Genesis, specifically Genesis 1, verses 1 through 2, from the NIV translation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, the waters in this case are Jesus Christ. But the issue I ran into was that in Genesis, it's very clear that there's actually a pattern of duality before the pattern of the Trinity. So in this case, it's God created the heavens, and then you have the earth, right? That pattern of duality of something above and then something below. Um, and this kind of contradicts what I said in my first video, and I talked about how the pattern of duality does not go beyond creation, or it's not as powerful as the pattern of the Trinity. Now I thought of a potential answer to this, and the answer is that if God hadn't created the heavens and the earth, then we wouldn't have been able to understand what he was saying, right? So first let's cover what heavens and earth means. So the heavens and the earth, he's not creating the intelligible realm here, right? In my first video, I talk about how the intelligible realm existed forever before, right? Because the intelligible realm is God. But in this case, what he's doing is he's basically, he's creating two realms. You have heavens and the earth, right? The spiritual realm and the physical realm, and they're both physical in the sense that they exist more than the ideas in the intelligible realm, but they just exist in a different plane of existence, if that makes sense. Or like they don't have the same physical form, right? Like the things on this planet, right? Or the physical things that, you know, you can touch and feel, they don't, in heaven, they're not, it's not the same physical form. It's something that we can't comprehend, which is why in creation we don't receive much details on heaven, is, and the reason is because, well, we wouldn't be able to understand it, right? Because we're not beings that come, I mean, we're not beings that were meant for heaven necessarily. We were meant for earth. um so the issue is that, well, very clearly it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So you have the pattern of duality as the first opening verse of the Bible. Now my response to that is that, well, if he didn't create earth at first, right, or at least the realm that we inhabit, then we wouldn't have been able to or understand what God was saying, right? So like, imagine, um if before, instead of saying in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, what if it said in the beginning, you know, the spirit was hovering over the formless waters, right? But that wouldn't make sense, because obviously waters don't exist at that point, because the earthly realm wasn't created, or the earth wasn't, the physical world wasn't formed yet, or it didn't have an existence, right? So like, if they tried explaining it as in like, oh, the formless waters hovered over the intelligible realm, well, you have to take into understanding that, um, at that point in time when they, you know, recorded Genesis, a lot of the Greek philosophy, which my revelation is built around, had not even, like, you know, none of the things that, I mean, maybe they were thought about, but nothing officially recorded, right? Like, a lot of, most of my stuff is based off of Plato, and Plato came, you know, a couple thousand years after, um, this verse, right? So if they wrote down, you know, the Holy Spirit hovered over the intelligible realm in the beginning, right? No one would have been able to understand what that meant, because they didn't know what the intelligible realm was at that point. So that's one of the main things. Right. So I still affirm that the pattern of the Trinity goes beyond the pattern of duality, even though the pattern of duality comes first. And the reason is because I'm sure that the pattern of the Trinity, you know, was going on before God created the heavens and the earth, but it was just, um, like, it couldn't have been explained in a way that we would have understood, if that makes sense, right? Like, even this, right, the Holy Spirit was hovering above the waters. We're kind of taking into like, a lot of the consensus right now is like, we don't know why the waters existed in the first place. So my theology solves that issue, right? Because it's just Jesus, right? That's what the formless waters are. Um, and the Holy Spirit, you know, is selecting the ideas in Jesus that glorify God the most, and then God the Father, you know, poof, it all has physical form. So yeah, that's one of the main things I wanted to address in, when talking about Genesis. So the last part of this video, we'll be talking about another, issue I've kind of had with my theology for a couple of months, but recently I came up with this solution to the issue. In that issue, I mean, I'll detail the issue first, and then I'll cover my solution. But the issue was, so if the Holy Spirit selected, um, all of the original forms, or all of the perfect versions of things in the beginning, right? And then God gave form to all of those perfect things, then why is it that we weren't there in creation in the beginning? Now, the reason, this is kind of an issue is because, well, the final image in Revelation, or at least in my theology, is we're going to be restored to our original forms that God intended us, in the beginning, right? Or it's selected for us, right? There, in the intelligible realm, there exists an absolute perfect version of us that completely glorifies God. And the issue is that, well, that form wasn't selected in the beginning or during creation, because it wasn't created, or at least, you know, as far as we know, it wasn't created because we weren't awake then. I mean, you know, obviously we wouldn't be able to remember it, but, there's good evidence to suggest that, every perfect version of everyone that's ever lived wasn't created in the beginning. Um, so this is kind of an issue that's been in the back of my mind. Now, one of the solutions that I thought about was there was two select. Well, I mean, both of them kind of involve two selections, but this one involves two selections in the beginning. So the solution involved, so you have the Holy Spirit selecting, all of the ideas from the intelligible realm or Jesus Christ, and that and in that he also selected all of the ideal versions of us that most glorified God. And then there was a second selection where God only actually gave form to some of the things that existed in the intelligible or um in that selection, if that makes sense. So um in other words, right, the way Plato described it was, well, this is his original conception. He originally named it the realm of forms, and that's just where all of the perfect things exist. I'm kind of adding on to that with my interpretation of the intelligible realm to create a kind of meta intelligible realm where all possible ideas exist, and like not just the perfect ones, but also, the, I guess we could say the corrupted ones, the weird ones, right? All these different um, types of ideas, right? The true ones, the wrong ones, right? Um, so my argument is, well, all of these ideas exist, and I gave my reasoning as to why they exist in my previous video. Um, but as I was saying, right? So the Holy Spirit selects, all of the ideas that glorify God the most. Now, the issue is, like I outlined before, is that, well, if God gave form to all of his ideas, then theoretically the perfect versions of us should have been given form, but they weren't, right? So maybe then that runs into the issue of like, well, if our perfect versions weren't selected, then how can we be in the final image of, creation, right? Or the final image, right? If we don't have a perfect form to be restored to. And I mean, another potential solution I thought about was, well, what if it was just the restoration towards Adam or the restoration towards Eve? But then the issue is, well, you lose your identity, right? Because if everyone's just Adam or if everyone's just Eve, you're not yourself anymore, right? So, um, now, my first solution was, okay, maybe there was a second selection in the beginning, right? The first selection was the Holy Spirit taking the ideas from the intelligible realm, right? All the ideas that glorify God the most, and in that selection exists all of the perfect versions of us, right? That was my initial thing, and then there was a second selection that happened, and that was just there were some things that were created. Now I think that's kind of, um, I feel, or at least I felt that that kind of made the first selection pointless, right? Because why do you need two selections in the beginning? Why not just do it in one, right? God, I mean, it's easy to say, like, or at least use our human instincts to say like what God is and what he isn't, and like say, oh, he shouldn't be doing things this way and he shouldn't be doing things that way. But to me, I mean, as a mere human, it seems kind of pointless to have two selections. So I think that this other solution that I'll briefly mention kind of solves that issue. And while there are still two selections, those two selections happen very different points in time. Now, so the my at least my interpretation right now or my understanding is that you do have the first selection, right, which is God selecting all of the things that glorify, or the Holy Spirit selecting all of the things that glorify God the most. And in that initial selection during creation, right, when the Holy Spirit is hovering over the formless waters, we weren't selected, right? The ideal versions of us weren't selected. Now, um, fortunately for us, however, right, that I don't think that doesn't mean we're not going to be in heaven, right? There's a way out, or there through Jesus Christ, right? And that's during Jesus's baptism. And during Jesus' baptism, Matthew 3:16, the NIV version, you have, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. So, this pattern, right, the pattern of the Trinity, which I talk about a lot in this video, and I talked about a bit or a lot in the last video, right? So the pattern of the Trinity is you have Jesus hovering above the formless waters, selecting all of, or no, geez, sorry, other way around. The Holy Spirit hovering above the formless waters, or Jesus, right? Well, in this case, it's Jesus, the physical form of Jesus, right? And then drawing up all of the ideas that glorify God the most. So my argument is that in this verse, what actually happened is, in this, when the Holy Spirit descended upon Jesus and after his baptism, what happened was all of the ideal, or all of the perfect forms of us that glorify God the most, were actually selected in this example of the pattern of the Trinity, right? So in this instance, that's why Jesus's baptism is not just, it's not symbolic, right? It actually, what's going on there is, he's the Holy Spirit is selecting all of the ideal versions of us, so that we might all retain our individuality, or our own, conscious experience. If you want to get a little cognitive, right? We might retain all our conscious experience in heaven, instead of just, not existing, or, turning into an atom, just being like, not even, that's basically like not existing, right? Because you don't get to retain your own conscious experience or your own individuality. But in this instance, right, or in this, during his baptism, we get a, not necessarily a, I mean, I guess you could say it's kind of a second chance, but there's another selection, and in that selection, all of us are included. Well, not us, but the perfect versions of us, and we kind of have to aim for those perfect versions. And is, I mean, it's going to be it's impossible to get there, but the miracle of, the end times, or the miracle of when heaven and earth meet, is will be restored to those perfect versions, right? No, I'll talk about this in the first video again, but like, no disability, no corruption, no disease, right? Will be perfect, and that's something that I'm looking forward to, I guess, and I hope you're looking forward to it as well. Thank you for watching this video, and please subscribe and like, so that I get more motivation to create more content like this. Thank you.